For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana, the minority whip, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of inquiring to the Majority Leader the schedule for next week.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And I also ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
With that, yield to the Majority Leader, the gentleman from Maryland.
I thank my friend from Louisiana, the Republican whip, for yielding. On Monday, there will be no votes expected in the House. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be made available by the close of business today. The House will also consider H.R. 312, the Mashpee Tribe Reservation Reaffirmation Act, and that will be considered under a rule. In addition, the House will consider H.R. 987, the Strengthening Healthcare and Lowering Prescription Drug Costs Act. This legislation is composed of 7 bills that would protect and expand affordable health care and lower prescription drug costs. The legislation consists of separate bills from the Energy and Commerce Committee to ban junk health plans, bring generic prescription drugs to market more quickly, provide funding for states to establish state-based marketplaces under the Affordable Care Act, require and provide funding for outreach and enrollment, and fund the Navigator program that assists Americans during the open enrollment period. All of these bills obviously will be directed at trying to reverse some of the steps that have been taken to undermine Americans' access to affordable quality health care. Lastly, Madam Speaker, the House will consider H.R. 5, the Equality Act. LGBT Americans and their families deserve to be protected against all forms of discrimination, no matter where they live. This legislation would ban discrimination against LGBT people in housing, employment, education, jury service, credit and financing, and public accommodations. And I yield back to the Republican whip.
Thank the Majority Leader for going through the schedule, walking through some of the bills that we're going to be taking up next week. As we just dealt with disaster funding, know the gentleman's well aware of the disagreements that have been expressed by many on our side, as well as the President and some senators over there, about some of the things that weren't in the disaster bill. Obviously, some of the problems regarding the crisis at the border, to help make sure that we can do better at addressing that crisis that's real, that's growing, as well as some of the problems that were identified in the agriculture funding that was included in the bill, where it was identified that there are some problems in the language to help some of our farmers get the actual money that they needed. A lot of those fixes have been negotiated, and those talks have gone on for a few weeks now. I would hope that as the bill goes over to the Senate, the gentleman and your side would continue to work with our side, both House, Senate, Republican, Democrat, to achieve a bipartisan disaster relief bill that can ultimately get all of these problems addressed and get signed by the President. And those conversations are ongoing. Hopefully they will continue through the weekend, and when the bill gets over to the Senate, we can try to get all of that resolved so that we can quickly move that bill through the process to the President's desk. And I'd yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The good news is we just passed a bipartisan bill with 34 members from your side voting in favor of that bill to give very, very substantial relief. In addition, an additional $3 billion to take care of the storms and natural disasters that have occurred since we passed a bill to the Senate many, many weeks ago that unfortunately was not dealt with by the Senate, largely because there was a reluctance to help the Americans who happen to live in Puerto Rico to the extent that we are helping other people around the country, as we should. So I agree with the gentleman. We had a bipartisan bill today. I'm hopeful that we can have a bipartisan bill moving forward. As you know, the amendment that was offered, the MTR that was offered to a object in the bill where there had been already a substantial increase, with apparently the argument being made on the floor that that money was going to be taken from the place to which we appropriated it to another area to which it was not appropriated. We had that somewhat, I want to say, confrontation with the president on doing exactly that, taking money from Milcon and wanting to put it in a wall. Very frankly, there was the opportunity to do that in the subcommittee and in the committee. And in fact, as you know, many of your colleagues who serve on that committee voted against funding the level of Head Start that they wanted to make a $2.8 billion increase to. That aside, I will tell the gentleman that clearly we want to make sure that we handle at the border people in a humanitarian way that's consistent with the American way. It is ironic, I will tell my friend, as you heard in the debate, that today is the day that is the one-year anniversary when we started a policy of taking children from their parents at the border and separating them, and some of those children have not to this day been reunited with their parents. We're very concerned about that. One of the things that I know the gentleman knows, when we opened government was shut down when we took over. When we opened government, we included $500 million, 500 million, a little over 500 million, for humanitarian expenditures for people at the border so we could treat them fairly. I think, frankly, that money has not all been spent at this point in time, but we do know that there is a challenge for us at the border with the numbers of people who are seeking asylum, seeking refuge, and that we are certainly, as the gentleman suggested, going to work on trying to respond to that in a bipartisan, effective way.
Gentleman yields.
I certainly will.
First, to address the comment that was made about reluctance on Puerto Rico, it's kind of hard to suggest there's reluctance to help Puerto Rico when we've appropriated more than $90 billion already and want to continue to make sure that Puerto Rico's got the relief that they need. And again, over $90 billion of money from the United States government has already been appropriated. We have other issues that we need addressed, including some problems with the money that in the bill was supposed to go to farmers. It's been identified that a lot of that money can't get to the farmers who need it. Many of them are going under. American farms that are going under that can't get the help they need. Those problems were identified. We'd like to get that fixed. There were other issues like the President's supplemental. And the supplemental, it was $4.5 billion of additional money that's needed to help with this crisis at the border. And I know some on the other side are in denial about the crisis, but it's real. We've had in recent weeks days in which one day, a single day, many times, more than 4,000 illegal crossings occurred, multiple times. Secretary Jay Johnson under President Obama said when he would get that report every day, it was the first report he'd get as Secretary of Homeland Security, how many people crossed illegally the day before. And he said if more than 1,000 a day crossed illegally, it was a bad day. Today, we're seeing experiences through Homeland Security where more than 4,000 people cross our border illegally per day. That's a crisis that has to be dealt with. It's why the President sent a supplemental funding request, and we'd like to see that included in this bill. We tried to start addressing that problem. And I know maybe there's an inability on the other side to look into this properly because there's so much fixation with collusion in Russia and in denial about the Mueller report that showed that there was no collusion. We just saw the Judiciary Committee come out with a contempt finding, and I don't know if the gentleman is planning any floor time to bring contempt to the floor, the bill that just came out of the Judiciary Committee. but it would be unprecedented, probably the first time in American history that somebody was found in contempt of Congress for not complying with the law, for not breaking the law. The Judiciary Committee was literally asking the Attorney General to break the law, otherwise they'd find him in contempt. Unprecedented, probably in our country's history. And so if they would fixate their time, this is, by the way, the committee that has jurisdiction over the border and the laws relating to our nation's immigration laws. And so while we've got a crisis at the border, you would think the Committee of Jurisdiction would be focusing on helping solve the problem and bringing bills to the floor to solve the crisis at the border, instead of all of the things that they continue to do to try to harass the administration, as opposed and maybe move towards impeachment, which they've alluded to, as opposed to solving real problems that this country's facing. So I would hope that the focus would shift to solving this serious problem and give it the attention it deserves, and look at the President's request on the supplemental to fix this crisis at the border so we can finally get control over it and help all of those millions of people who are trying to come to America the right way. The great part of our immigration law, we let in over 1 million people a year, most generous nation in the world. And yet we've got a crisis where in some days thousands of people per day are trying to cross illegally and are crossing illegally. And I would hope we could come together and agree that we've got to solve this problem. And that's what the supplemental request starts to address. It surely doesn't address it entirely, and we've had that debate over the last few months, and we'll continue that. And hopefully we can resolve that too. But in the meantime, I'd like to see us address that problem, and I'd yield back.
Will the gentleman yield?
And I'd yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. He had a lot of facts and assertions in his comments. First of all, let me correct. He adopted the President's number. The President's number was wrong. It bore no relationship to reality. He picked it out of the air. Numerous fact checkers have indicated that. The facts are that $42 billion has in fact been allocated, 20.3 obligated, and 12.7 outlaid. So clearly there are funds that have been allocated, but not the $90 billion to which the gentleman referred. Having said that, obviously what held it up in the Senate was the argument over Puerto Rico. I mean, that's why we have been put to the process of passing another bill. Now, the good news in that delay is we did take care of the Midwest. We put $3 billion in there for disasters that occurred subsequent to the first emergency bill that we passed, a disaster relief bill that we passed. And as I said, we included $500 million when we opened up government for humanitarian relief. We included another $500 million for judges because there are, as a gentleman knows, legitimate seekers of asylum who are fearful of their own lives, the lives of their families are in danger, and they're coming here. The gentleman well knows there are some people in the White House who are don't want to see. They want to see the numbers of immigrants to America almost eliminated. So that there is some discussion and disagreement in the White House. I don't know exactly where the president stands on that, but he certainly has been hostile to immigration. So I take the gentleman at his belief, but we have not necessarily seen that from the White House. Having said that, we will work because we believe, as he does, that people who come to the United States need to be treated, for whatever reason they come to the United States, in a way consistent with our American values, in a humanitarian way. And it is, I will repeat, ironic that we are debating this issue on the year's anniversary of children being taken from the arms of their mothers and their fathers and sent hundreds of miles, in some cases 1,000 miles away, and have still, some of them have not been reunited with their parents. I'm glad that there is concern about humanitarian treatment now. That's appropriate. I share the gentleman's view on that. and hopefully we can reach bipartisan agreement in the very near term. As the gentleman knows, the President's request was just sent down last week. As the President further knows, we have appropriated money to certain objects, and the President, and we had a confrontation on that, and both the House and the Senate thought the President was taking money and applying it to an object which we had not authorized. Unfortunately, and then the Congress stood up for itself in a bipartisan way in the Senate and in the House. Unfortunately, the President vetoed that bill. And he is spending money that was not authorized by the Congress of the United States. We are having a number of challenges to the underpinning of our democratic system and the authority of the Congress of the United States versus the exercise of authoritarian power by the President of the United States. And I would hope the gentleman would share that view. But having said all that, we clearly want to get to the same objective, and I'm sure the Senate, and I know I just talked to Ms. Lowy, they're going to review as Ms. Delores said on the floor, going to review the request, see what the money is going to be spent for, make sure that it is in fact going to be spent for humanitarian relief at the border. We're very concerned about that, and I think rightfully so. And that's what it's projected to be, and we want to make sure that that's what it is. And so we will proceed, and hopefully in a bipartisan way, and hopefully with relative speed. But I hope the Senate, Mr. Whip, Madam Speaker, I hope the Senate will take up this relief bill and pass it forthwith, so that the folks who have been so damaged by natural disasters, Madam Speaker, will get some relief, will understand that their federal government cares about them and is going to give them the relief they need. I hope that we can move that as quickly as possible. I yield back.
And let's be clear on the problems with our immigration laws. The gentleman mentioned asylum. We all know right now somebody comes across the border on a daily basis, in the thousands on some days, and they come across and claim asylum coming through illegal parts of our border, not the ports of entry. The President's made it clear, if you're seeking asylum, there's a legal way to do it. Come through the port of entry and properly seek asylum. Many people know, and they're coyotes, people who make money, human trafficking people across the border, and they read from a script. And they all know the script, whether they are seeking asylum or not. They just read the script and they're let in. And we see it all the time. We do. We see it all the time, and they know the game. It's a game because it's a loophole in the law that we've tried to fix, haven't gotten any help from the other side, but they know that if they read the script, and ironically, they've come through multiple countries that have offered them asylum, and they turned down that asylum. So that's not the right way to do it. The President said, come the right way. Nobody said, you've never seen the President say get rid of immigration laws. He said, fix the immigration laws, secure the border, have a legal way to come here, and get rid of things like the visa lottery system and turn it to a merit-based system to make this law work better for the people that want to come here and seek the American dream. And I know we've beaten this to death, and we'll continue to debate it. Hopefully we get some real conversations over the weekend to solve these other problems in the disaster bill that aren't included and clear up the number. We've seen a number of $90 billion plus that's been appropriated to Puerto Rico. But regardless, clearly it's well over 50, probably closer to 90. We'll continue to talk about that as well and address this problem. And if the gentleman has anything else, I'd yield.
No, I don't have anything more to say.
With that, Madam Speaker, I would yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.